Hi, my name is Autumn, and welcome to Prescott Valley Public Library's YA Booklovers podcast. Today on our first show, I am joined by Michelle.
Hi.
And KayLynn.
Hello.
Who will be my awesome co-hosts as we talk about our top new young adult books, the latest teen programs at the library, and later on, we also have a special guest. Kailyn Flanders is a young adult author known for her debut fantasy novel, Shielded. She has fun stories to tell and advice for all the aspiring writers out there, so stick around. And since this is the launch of our podcast, we wanted to introduce ourselves so you can get to know each one of us a little better. So I'm going to start. My name is Autumn, and I'm the new young adult librarian at Prescott Valley Public Library. I recently moved to Arizona from New York City, and I'm an avid reader of young adult books. I love creative writing as well, and am excited to talk with various authors who can share advice with all of us out there who want to get published or develop our stories better. Some favorite genres are fantasy, fairy tales, paranormal, mystery, suspense, historical fiction, and romance. Oh, and I love vampires, so just be prepared for me to talk about a lot of vampires. Michelle, do you have any favorite genres?
Hi, my name's Michelle, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at Prescott Valley Public Library, and I am a huge fan of young adult books, and the genres that I really enjoy reading are magical realism, historical fiction, and mysteries.
KayLynn?
Hi, my name is Kailyn, and I'm the library assistant in the YA department here at Pvpl. I love to read nonfiction, anything esoteric, bizarre, informational, or just interesting. Really, I'm all over the map when it comes to reading. And occasionally I will pick up a sci-fi novel. Marie Lu's War Across is my most favorite recent sci-fi, but it is a close second to my original favorite sci-fi classic, Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card.
All right, thank you. So, part of our YA Book Lovers podcast is going to be talking about our favorite YA books, or the ones that are new and that we're excited to share with all of you. So, as we are all YA book lovers here, we want to share with you some new YA books we love or are excited to read. All of these titles are available to check out at the library. The first book I want to talk about is Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know by Samira Ahmed. Now, if you're familiar with the phrase Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know, you may also know this phrase is associated with the 19th century poet Lord Byron, known for his romantic poetry and illicit affairs. He truly was dangerous to women. So, as someone who loves romanticism and the romantic writers, this title really spoke to me. The novel is about two girls in two different timelines. Kayem, a French, Muslim, and Indian American, is in Paris for the summer after a complete academic embarrassment when she meets Alexandra, a descendant of the famous Alexandre Dumas, also known as the writer of The Three Musketeers. Together, they unravel the mystery of a young harem girl in history named Layla, who may be connected to Byron, Dumas, and the artist Delacroix. Diversity, contemporary and historical romance, mystery, and a feminist story that gives a voice to an unknown woman in literature. Count me in. I'm so excited to read this one. It's also an NPR and Forbes favorite best book, as well as a 2021 YALSA Best Books for Teens nominee. I have to say, I just started reading it, and I am already hooked. As previously mentioned, I love vampires, especially romantic, brooding vampires. So I'm thrilled to share with all of you a new vampire YA series with Twilight comparisons. Even the cover kind of looks like it. Crave by Tracy Wolff is number 1 in the 4-book Crave series, with book 3 Covet already set to be released March 2nd, just a few days from now. So, binge away. Now, book 1, Crave, was released last year and is already making a huge splash. Not only was Crave an Amazon Best YA Book of 2020, but it was also Glitter Magazine's number 1 pick for Best YA of 2020. After Grace's parents die in a car accident, she moves from sunny California to freezing Alaska to live with her uncle, who runs a private academy called Katmere, an academy that also holds a ton of secrets. And monsters, of course. With vampires, shifters, witches, and more, Grace is beginning to wonder if she is bait to something sinister. Naturally, she's also following for the bad boy Jackson, a vampire who may or may not be trustworthy. With Twilight, Harry Potter, and Vampire Academy comparisons, what's not to like? If you love paranormal romances and magic schools, be sure to get sucked into the supernatural world of Crave. It's already on my own list. The last new book I want to highlight is Rubble Rose by Emma Terrell. A Disney Beauty and the Beast retelling, Rubble Rose asks, what happens after Happily Ever After? Part fairy tale, part historical romance set during the French Revolution. Rubble Rose tells Belle's story as a new queen. When Belle discovers a magic mirror, she's warned about an impending danger. Perhaps it's not the best time to become a royal. At present, most sequels to fairy tales don't really speak to me. They're not that interesting. But I have to say, the French Revolution setting is completely intriguing. How will Belle and her now uncursed beast escape with their lives? Rubble Rose definitely promises suspense, more romance, and deeper characterization for two of our favorite Disney characters. Well, my personal favorite Disney romance, anyway. Aside from maybe like Pirates of the Caribbean or Princess Leia and Han Solo in Star Wars, now that Star Wars is Disney. Colleen, do you have any great recommendations to share with us?
This is Colleen. Like I said before, I like to read nonfiction. I chose to share with you a few tiny books from the Pocket Change collection, which is a series of tiny books described as small but mighty on a variety of topics that you may be interested in. I love tiny books anyway, but the topics in these two books are inspiring and worth a quick read. The great thing about nonfiction is that you can hop around and read parts of a book you find interesting, but you don't have to read a book cover to cover to get something out of it. Imaginary Borders by Zareta Martinez highlights topics on climate change, pollution, and the interconnectedness with social class and poverty that impact people beyond political borders. He calls for a new wave of action to replace complacency. Zareta is an indigenous climate activist and a hip-hop artist, and his tiny book is definitely worth a read. I want to read you a snippet from the book. Our generation has the tools to understand what's going on better than any before us through social media and technology, but we often remain silent because those stories of crisis are never met with stories of solution. It's hard to find hope in the ocean of negative, depressing, fear-based media, so a lot of us check out. To cope with the broken world we live in, we distract ourselves with social media, drugs, partying, and an endless black hole of viral dance videos, leaned-out trap rappers, and Fortnite memes. A little bit later, he talks about, we all have a responsibility to be part of this redefinition of movement culture. It's time to reclaim our space in these movements. And then he also says, this book isn't about changing the world, it's about building it together. Whether the content of these pages help you find it or not, you have a part to play, because the future is as much yours as it is mine, and that's a beautiful thing. Come check it out. The other book I wanted to share with you is called Taking on the Plastic Crisis by Testa. Hannah is a teen who, from a very young age, found a deep passion for nature and is an environmental advocate. She is the creator of HannahForChange.org, which is an organization focused on fighting issues that are threatening the planet. She is a sustainability advocate and public speaker, and in 2018, she helped start the first Plastic Pollution Awareness Day in the state of Georgia. She admits the power of plastic and how it has been an incredibly helpful product, but too much of anything is the problem. She is helping to bring bigger awareness to the steadily increasing issue of single-use, disposable plastic products that are filling our oceans and seeping into every part of human and creature life. She says, I recognized firsthand that young people do have voices and we can be heard. You can find these tiny books along with other books on similar topics at the Prescott Valley Public Library.
Thanks, Colleen. Michelle, do you have any great recommendations you want to share with us?
I'm currently listening to They Went Left by Monica Hess. This is a historical mystery set in World War II. The soldiers who liberated the Gross Rosen concentration camp said the war was over, but nothing feels over to 18-year-old Zofia Liederman. Her body has barely begun to heal. Her mind feels broken and her life is completely shattered. 3 years ago, she and her younger brother Ahmed were the only members of their family to be sent to the right, away from the gas chambers of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Everyone else, her parents, her grandmother, her radiant Aunt Maya, were all sent to the left. Another book that I'm super excited to start reading is Wayward Witch by Zareta Cordova. The witches of New York are back. In this epic conclusion to the award-winning series, the final Mortiz sisters' story is told. Infused with Latin American tradition, the Brooklyn Brujas series follows 3 sisters, the Brujas, as they develop their powers and battle magic in their hometown and worlds beyond. My final book suggestion is The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. Decca lives in fear and anticipation of the blood ceremony that will determine whether she will become a member of her village. She prays for red blood to feel like she belongs, but it runs gold. A mysterious woman gives her a choice: stay in the village and submit to her fate, or leave to fight for the emperor in an army of girls just like her, who can defeat the empire's greatest threat.
Thanks, Michelle and Colleen. That ends our new book section of YA Booklovers. Aside from a ton of young adult books at Pvpl, we also have several new YA programs we want to share with all of you. First of all, we have monthly teen crafternoon kits you can pick up and take home. For the month of March, stop by to pick up and make your own Zen garden. These little gardens are a great way to practice more mindfulness and create calmness in our lives. For March, we also have some awesome gaming programs. Join us for our new virtual RPG club, where we play a different role-playing game each month. For March, we're playing Cyberpunk, so you don't want to miss that. Just make sure to register so we can send you the link to Discord. You're also invited to an interstellar game of Among Us. Find out who the imposters on the spaceship are. If you want the game code, again, you will need to register. Finally, we're going to play an online book bingo. If you win a game, you can come to the library to take home a book of your choosing. Now, we also have a couple of exciting upcoming creative programs that Colleen is going to talk about.
Prescott Valley is full of young, talented artists, and we've started a creative arts club. You may have already seen some of the writing and art prompts rolling through our Instagram feed. This Creative Arts Club is going to be an opportunity for teens to access a variety of art and writing prompts, along with video workshops from local artists, as well as workshops from YA writers, demonstrating parts of their creative process. We'll rotate artists and writers each month, so come check out what's being created in your community. We're also looking forward to another awesome program coming up in April. Are you into fashion and creative ways to upcycle? In honor of Earth Day on April 22nd, the YA department is hosting a virtual recycled fashion show for teens 12 to 18 years old. You are invited to participate in this free program to create an ensemble along with the environment that you are in by using recycled materials and reused clothing. Some supplies and materials will be provided, and starting in March, you can see more details on our website at pvlib.net/teens. Come check out our rules, registration, and the rest of the program.
Thanks, Colleen. And Michelle, our resident adult services librarian, has several fantastic programs from Silverkite that is also open to teens. Michelle, can you talk about some of the upcoming programs and how teens can register?
Definitely. So in March, we're offering, as Autumn said, several classes. And some of the ones I'd like to highlight are Bollywood dancing, Introduction to Improvisational Theater, Indian cooking, memoir writing, and beginning watercolors. And if anybody's interested in signing up for these live classes, you can go to our website, pvlib.net, click on Attend, and then find classes and programs. And you're welcome to sign up for as many as you like.
Thanks, Michelle. For the rest of the teen programs we talked about today, you can register online at pvlib.net/teens. For our final segment of YA Book Lovers, we're thrilled to welcome YA author Kailyn Flanders to talk about her debut fantasy novel, Shielded. Kailyn is an author, editor, and cookie eater, because who doesn't love cookies? She has a degree in English language and editing and has worked as a freelance editor and book designer for over 12 years. Her debut novel, Shielded, was published by Delacorte Press, with her sequel, Untethered, set to come out this July. Currently, Kailyn lives in Utah. Kailyn, thanks for joining us today. We are so excited to have you with us for our first episode. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe give a little introduction?
Sure. First off, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. A little bit about me. I grew up in Utah, and other than a brief stint living in San Francisco, I have lived here most of my life. And I live here now with my family. I have 4 kids and a Newfie Doodle puppy. So there's lots of energy over here at my house. I got a degree in English language and I minored in editing. And I actually worked as a freelance editor and book designer for the past about 12 years or so. Let's see, I used to speak Spanish, but I don't anymore. I'm way out of practice. And I love reading, playing volleyball, and traveling, and I love eating good food.
That sounds fun. Any favorite places to travel?
Well, at the moment, with the pandemic happening and no travel happening,
yes, of course.
I would take like the neighboring city at this point. But some of my favorite places were, I was able to go to Australia, and that was just like a magical experience. And I really love England and Italy, and then Disneyland. And I know that Disneyland is like different than those other places, but it's also magical in its own way.
It's always magical. Disneyland never gets old. Disney World, Disneyland, I've been several times. It's always fun.
It really is. It really is.
It would be nice to go again right now. Maybe one day.
Oh, yeah. You're going to make me start crying, like just thinking about how much I wish I could go right now. It's snowing at my house right now, too. So, like, sunny California sounds fantastic.
It really does. I'm like, I just keep dreaming of a beach right now. Yeah, I don't know about anyone else, but
yeah, that's why books are so important to me right now, is because it's the only way I can escape anything.
I totally agree. Books are like the best kind of escape, and you write fantasy, and I always say fantasy is like just a wonderful escape from reality, which is what we all need right now.
Absolutely.
So who or what motivated you to become a writer, and have you always wanted to be a writer?
Okay, so I actually haven't always wanted to be a writer. I have always had stories running around in my head. I grew up with a pretty big, very unmanicured yard. And so we would just spend hours and hours out there playing, making up stories, creating other worlds. So I've always kind of lived in a fantasy world, but I never thought I was, I don't know, talented enough to write it, or maybe not talented, but maybe persistent enough to get from, I can write one page of this story down, but like getting through a whole book, it just always seemed too hard to me. I did always love words though. So that's why, I was always a huge reader. It's how I experienced life basically. And, I loved words, and I became an editor because I loved words, and, I loved seeing other people's words get better and clearer, and taking something and making it truer to the author's vision. So that was sort of where I was at. And then I hit a point of dissatisfaction in my reading where I wasn't finding the books that I wanted to read on the shelf. Everything was, I don't know, it was starting to be too dark, too gritty. There was stuff in all of the books that I was reading that I just didn't want on my head in repeat. There were other books that just weren't well written. I don't know. There's just this big like dissatisfaction in the books that I was finding. Not that the books didn't exist out there. I just wasn't finding them. And then my friend invited me to a writing conference. And this was when I was 29. So I had been a freelance editor and book designer for like 6 or 7 years by then. And she invited me to a writing conference, and I was like, sure, I'll go. As an editor, I'll find more clients. It's fine. But the keynote speaker was a fantastic speaker, and he was actually a horror writer. And I don't read horror because I am scared of everything. But he was phenomenal in that he talked about how stories connect us together, and how it helps us empathize with people and see the world in a new, different way, and how important that connection is, especially right now when the world is trying to divide us. and that we all have light that we can share and like stories that we can share to uplift and help and connect other people. And that resonated really strongly with me, partly because of the dissatisfaction that I was having and partly because of how powerful I believe words are. And so after that conference, I'd had a story running through my head. It had been in my head a little bit longer than like usually they come and then they go and then I go on to the next thing. But this story had stuck with me for a little while. And then I hit this writing conference and then I was like, let's try it. Let's see if I can pull out an entire draft and see what happens. So that's sort of how I started. The journey was longer than that, but that's how I got my start.
I totally agree. There are so many stories that we need out there that are in people's heads that are like full of light. And I think that's something that we actually like need in this world right now, because it's been such a hard year. Like everything seems so dark and gritty. And even like a lot of TV seems like dark and gritty. And it's kind of time for things that are more uplifting or not. It doesn't have to be like, not tragic or anything, but uplifting in some way where it's just not like resonating in darkness. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a book for everything. Like I have read dark books when I was in a dark place and it helped me because it was like resonating with that dark place that I was in, but I didn't want to stay in it forever. So once I like just the continual was just hard for me personally. And I was like, you know what, if I'm feeling this way, maybe there are other people feeling this way. And I've never tried it. Like I can't sit here and complain about not finding good books that I want to read if I'm not willing to go out and like do something about it. So that was kind of my attitude going into it.
Well, I kind of heard before that if you're not seeing the story that you want to read, that means that you're meant to write it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a quote by Toni Morrison. And she's just epically amazing. But yes, like that.
Really amazing.
Yeah. Like that. I don't know. That really resonates with me.
Yeah. So you talked about like how words have power. Do you have like an early experience or a story like when you were a child that kind of spoke to you, that kind of created your interest in words and storytelling?
I think it was a lot of little experiences that built over time. I was very anxious as a child and I didn't know what that was when I was little. Like when I was little, anxiety like wasn't actually a thing, but it was like, especially as I got into junior high and into high school, there were times when I would feel like physically ill just at the thought of like having to interact with other people or like a test coming up. I don't know, like there was a lot of anxiety and I didn't know what it was. And so I had different ways of coping with it. And one of those was reading. And so reading, like, I don't know, is it too cliche to say it changed my life? Like no. reading books was a safe place for me to experience the world that didn't trigger any anxiety in me, but it helped me be able to see others communicate, see others overcome really difficult trials, both internal and external. And beyond that, like in the moment, like, I don't know if I was rationalizing that as a young tween or teenager, but even in elementary school, I would be having a hard day at school or at home or wherever. And I would pick up a book and take an hour or two or like 5 or 7 and escape. And that escape allowed me to recharge and reset my feelings. And it would change the day that I was having from just like a terrible day into something that I was excited about and looking forward to, or I don't know, it had the power to change my emotions and change my outlook on my day and on my life. And so, just little experiences again and again and again of reading just sort of showed me that.
Well, tell me a little bit about your writing process and the story of kind of how you got published. Well, and also, did it help that your background is in editing, becoming a writer? Yes.
So, I mean, yes and no. There's pros and cons to everything. So I've always loved words. I've always loved reading. And I studied editing. I studied a very technical side of the language. So I have a good grasp of grammar and the language and how to communicate a clear sentence. But there's more to writing a story, like crafting a story, than just like telling what happened. And I didn't really know a lot about that, or how to structure something, or how to pace something. So I did have like the education that I got was very useful, but I still had a lot to learn. So to be able to put those, the technical side and the story side sort of together, I like continuing on from the story that I had said earlier. So when I decided to write this draft, I did a huge outline, just sort of telling myself everything that was going to happen in the book. And then I think the first draft took only 2 months because I was just like spewing it onto the page, trying to get to the end. And when I did get to the end, I felt really great, first of all, because I had never finished a book before. And that is really, really hard. But I knew that it wasn't good enough yet because it didn't feel like the books that I read and like pulled off the shelf at the library. So I knew that there was a lot more to go. And so then my editing experience comes back in as I'm going to writing conferences as much as I can, reading craft books, joining a writing group, trying to get feedback and give feedback. I love editing. Like I love it. I've been doing it for years and years and years. And I was willing to take out anything in my story, take it apart, stitch it back together. And every time I would see the draft get better and I would be motivated to keep going and keep going and keep going. So I think, so after that, so my draft actually went through about 14 like humongous rounds of revisions, like taking characters out, putting them back in, combining them, taking out plot threads. Like it was crazy. And at that point, I decided this is the best I can get it. I'm going to try querying literary agents just to see how far I could take this and see how far I could go with it, because I know that the chances are very slim of getting an agent, especially your first time, like your very first manuscript. Like I knew my odds. So I had placed my expectations very, very low. But after every round of feedback that I got, or like every round of rejection I got, I would just go change my book some more and say, oh, you need like tighter pacing. All right, let's tighten the pacing, or working on my query letter. Anyway, so after only about 4 months, I signed with a literary agent, and she suggested another big round of revisions. So, and then we put on submission with publishers, and I was on submission with publishers for about a year until I found someone who wanted to publish it. And I think publishing your very first book you've ever written does not happen very often. And most people will shelve like 6 to 10 books before. But I always say, I wrote the same book. I just wrote it 14 times as I was learning how, right? And I think it was being an editor and being willing to change anything in my story is what sort of gave me the motivation to keep going. And I know all people aren't going to be like that, but that's how I was.
So you mentioned being in a writing group. Does it help kind of working with other authors, like giving each other feedback? Is that a huge part of your process of improving and editing along those different revisions?
Yes. Taking a story from your own head and putting it on paper is great. But if you want other people to be able to read it, that's where you have to revise it, and you have to get other people's opinion. And sometimes they'll say like, oh, you should change it like this. But what that really means is this isn't working the way that I, the author, wanted it to work. And so I need to figure out a way to make it hit the way I want it to hit in the reader's mind and in the reader's emotion. And having a writing group, I think, is integral to that, because not only are you getting outside feedback on your own work, but you're looking at their stuff and you're learning how to recognize when something isn't working, and then trying to think about why it's not working for you based on what's there on the page. So not only like the getting feedback, but the giving feedback is also really important.
Okay, so let's start talking about your debut novel, Shielded. What's it about for the readers out there, or the listeners out there that haven't heard of your book before?
Okay, so Shielded is a YA fantasy, and it's about a girl who I'm going to try that one again. Shielded is a YA fantasy about a girl who spent her whole life hiding her magic. But when ancient mages escape their prison and come after her family, she has to figure out how to use that magic in order to protect those that she loves. And it has like old libraries and hidden identities and a really magical, menacing forest. And it's basically everything that I love about fantasy in one book.
Well, as an epic fantasy, I see a lot of Terry Brooks in your storytelling, a little Robin McKinley, who I used to read when I was younger, and even a little Tolkien with your main character, Janisara. Her kind of desire to fight and not be kind of stuck at home kind of reminds me of Eowyn a little bit. But what writers, fantasy novels, or even fairy tales influence the writing of your characters and plot points?
Okay, first of all, it makes me so happy that you said that. Oh my gosh. Yes. So I grew up on Terry Brooks. I read the the Sword of Shannara series. Loved that.
I love that series too. Can I just say?
My gosh. It was so good. I mean, it is so good. I just haven't read it in a long time. The Wheel of Time series. I read Lord of the Rings in high school, and it just like impacted me in this author created a whole different like ecosystem. It was incredible. Shannon Hale is another one that her writing always resonates with me. I'm happy that you said Robin McKinley. I love her writing. So those are some that sort of, I don't know, melded in with my subconscious. As I was writing, I kept like things would come up that I'd be like, oh yeah, this is familiar. These are the familiar things that I love about these fantasy books.
It kind of goes back to the archetypes. I don't know if you ever read through Joseph Campbell, but I kind of see that in a lot of fantasy storytelling. And there's something like comfortable about it. How can you make your story your own, but it still has those familiar elements, and that makes us readers like super comfortable in your world, as long as the world is, well built. And so I definitely think you did that.
Yeah, my book Shielded will feel very familiar to fantasy people. Like it will feel very, very familiar, but I think it's all about seeing it through that main character's eyes, because you can have similar things happen in different stories, but you've never seen it from Janisara's perspective, for example. And I think that's what makes stories truly magical, is that you get to live in someone else's head for a little while.
I totally agree. And I enjoyed living in Janisara's head. She was definitely interesting.
Yay.
What kind of research did you do for Shielded, and how long do you spend researching before beginning the book? I know you mentioned an outline, but did you kind of do research as well?
Okay, so with Shielded, I started off just with a goal to finish a draft. And then I spent 2 years revising and working on that and like taking the story deeper, fleshing out my world system and my world building and magic system. So for that one, I kind of researched as I went along the way. I had to research not only things for the world and the characters, but like how to write and how to have good characters and good plots and stuff like that. So there was a lot of like both technical and specific research going on during that. For Shielded, let's see, it was just a bunch of little things along the way, because again, a lot of that world and the story were influenced by books that I had read when I was younger, and like just all of the fantasy books that I had read and learned from as I went. And I tried to put my own spin on things, and the locations were heavily influenced by places that I've been, and bringing the feeling of those places into this fictional world. So that's the kind of research that I did with Shielded. I'm currently researching a new book though, and I'm trying to focus on things first that will be crucial to the main storyline, because I think that anything that affects the plot, like I need to know before I start. But as you revise, you can add in little details that make the world really come alive. So that's sort of how I go into it. Because otherwise you could spend your entire life researching something and never sit down and get started. But it's just important to remember you can always add details later. You just need to know the bones of your story.
It's very true. You mentioned some settings in there. Were there any particular places that you are actually basing it on, real places?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's think. So the Wild is a combination of two places that I've been. When I was younger, I went on a 5-day backpacking trip through the Uinta Mountains, which are some like high pine forests near where I live, high elevation, and just like trekking through the middle of like mountains with lakes and pine trees for 5 days. That sort of influenced that feeling that takes place in the wild. And then there's also a hike up near where my brother lives in Washington State. It's called the Big Four Ice Caves. And the pine trees up in the Pacific Northwest are just crazy tall, like crazy tall. The flora and fauna there is just fantastic. So I pulled a lot of that into the wild. Turia, which is not Jenna's home kingdom, but she spends a lot of time there, is based on partly from Tuscany when I visited Italy a lot of years ago. And there's like the culture is very Italian influenced. I try to do research into the Etruscan culture, which is the culture that was there before the Romans came. And then also my mom grew up in Washington State, but in the east side of the state, and she grew up on a cherry farm. And so we would drive through the farmlands. And so I also pulled some of that into it. So those are, I'm trying to think if there are more specific things, but nothing else is coming off on the top of my mind. But it was just taking these places that I've been and the feelings that I felt when I was there and trying to put that into this new world.
Earlier, you mentioned how much editing you did and like taking things out. Were there any interesting passages or characters you edited out of the book, out of Shielded, and you're kind of like, oh, I miss it, but it really wasn't meant to be?
Yes. So up until I got an agent and signed with her, Enzo, the main, like the prince from the neighboring kingdom, he had his own point of view chapters for the whole book. Like he had bunches of chapters. But when I signed with my agent, she helped me realize that it wasn't really his story. It was Jenna's story, and that, he didn't have as strong of a character arc. And so she suggested that we take all of his point of view character scenes out. So that was the massive revision that I did with her. And I feel like it tightened the story so much. And it was sad to see him go because I love him, but it's Jenna's story and it made it a better story that way. And, one edit that I put in sort of last minute that I really love with the guidance of my editor was making the wild as magical and menacing as it is. That was one of the last edits that I put in, that I changed it to just up the stakes and the tension. And it's really come alive. And it's something that fans tell me that they love is, oh my gosh, the wild is so cool. Anyway, so just because you write a story one way doesn't mean it can't be better another way, right? So
that's very true. And I think it also probably made Enzo a more believable character just because you knew him so well. And so even though we're not getting inside his head, it's still kind of there a little bit in the story. So.
Yeah, because I knew what was in his head because I had written it.
Exactly. Okay, so Shielded, do you have a dream cast if it ever got to be a TV or movie with any actors in mind?
Okay, so first of all, I'm terrible at this. I'm terrible at it. So if fans out there have fan casts, like, please let me know. Help me out here. I'm not super. So like all the characters in my book are teens, and I am not like up on teen actors. So like the ages are off on all of these actors. But some people that I've thought about is Saoirse Ronan for Jenna. She played Jo in the most recent Little Women, among other like great things. Enzo, I would say maybe like a Ben Barnes, but when he was younger.
When he was younger, okay, totally makes sense.
Yeah, like everyone's old now because I'm like, oh, no, I don't know. I spend all my time writing books. I don't spend a lot of my time watching shows anymore. So you win some, you lose some. Ren would be like a William Moseley. He was Edward in Narnia, or like a Chris Hemsworth, but like younger, like way younger. Let's think. Kiara could be like a Lily Collins, and Mari could be like I don't know. The only thing that came to mind was Mara Wilson, who played Matilda. Just someone who's like young and like really mischievous. That's the best I could do. I'm not great at this.
I kind of get what you're saying, though, like kind of the essence of those kind of actors, and find a younger cast. You never know when they cast things. They usually cast in their 20s, though. Let's be real.
That's true.
They pretend to be teens.
That's true.
So one of the actors I could see for Jenna is totally Imogen Waterhouse. I don't know if you've ever watched The Outpost. It's a fantasy TV series, and she does a good job. But anyways, I recommend it for any fantasy fans out there. It's totally cheesy in the beginning, so just stick with it.
That sounds like exactly my kind of show. Fantastic.
So Shielded is also a duology with Untethered, book 2, set to come out this summer. Without giving away too many spoilers from Shielded, can you talk about the sequel? And also, will all the unanswered questions be addressed in Untethered? Yes.
So all of the questions will be answered. This will be the final book. I mean, I think, unless other ideas come to me at a much later date. But yeah, so this is the conclusion to duology. Untethered is a companion novel. If you've seen the cover for Untethered, there you will have a hint of who those point of view characters are. And the action continues about 2 months after Shielded ends. So there's a lot of the same issues and same problems, same world, but it's just told from 2 other characters' point of views. Jenna does make appearances in it. And I don't know. I did it that way because I didn't want to, rip Jenna and Enzo. Like, I don't know. I didn't want to like have things finished in the first book and then like take them away and then patch them back up together again. I just wanted to continue the story in a different way, like from a different angle. It's a lot of fun. I really, really love the story, and it's got tons of adventure. And my mantra while I was writing it was keep the fun, cut the boring. So should be a wild ride, I hope.
I'm looking forward to reading it. If you can choose, we kind of talked about some of your fantasy like authors that you were influenced by. What would be your all-time favorite fantasy novel or novels?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. So it's hard to choose, first of all. And second of all, I am a library patron. Like, I love libraries, but that also means I haven't kept track of, like, when I was younger, I don't remember all of the books that I read and loved and like had an impact on me, because I didn't have the money to buy a lot of books when I was younger. So there's those 2 factors going into it. But my favorite recent reads would be Crown Duel by Sherwood Smith. That is a book, and I think it used to be 2 books, Crown Duel and Court Duel, and I think they just sort of merged them into one. But that book feels just like the perfect fantasy to me. Like, the pacing is on, there's just hints of magic, hints of romance, but the characters are so dynamic and relatable. So I love that one. And I also really love the Demon King series by Cinda Kaima. That one is another one that I read and reread and like bought the books because I was like, this is so epically amazing. And it felt like the books that I had read growing up. So those are a couple of my recent favorites, if that's helpful.
It is. I remember reading Crown Duel a few times when I was younger. So it was one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, I didn't have any idea it existed until my friend recommended it to me, probably 8 years ago. And I was like, where has this been my whole life? This is fantastic. So yeah,
it's amazing. So whoever is listening who has never read Crown Duel, go and read it. It's a really good fantasy. I haven't read the other one, so I'm going to have to check that one out.
Oh, they are fantastic. It's a 4-book series. It's epic fantasy at its most epic. It's great.
Definitely going to be at the top of my list. Okay, so you also mentioned earlier that you were doing research on a novel. So Are you working on another novel right now? And could you kind of give us a little brief idea of what it's about?
Yes. So I had been working on a novel earlier, and that novel just got rejected. So even after you sort of quote unquote make it, there's always rejection along the way. So that one got rejected. So I'm shelving it for a bit to decide what I want to do with it. If I want to try and I understand why the publishers that we talked to didn't want to buy it. I totally get it because of the market and the way things are. Like, I get it, but it makes me just wonder if it would come back down the line someday later, or if I can twist it into something else. So that one is shelved it's like percolating in the back of my mind what I want to do with it. For now, I'm working on a new story. And it has a vast desert where demigods live and a boy who has to confront them in order to save his sister that he accidentally cursed. So it's going to be, I don't know, I haven't written it yet, but in my head, it's a really epic tale of learning to believe in yourself and believe in others, even after you've been betrayed by them, kind of.
Well, it sounds like a promising start, I think.
Yeah. It's fun to dive into a new world and a new story, so I'm excited.
Okay, so before we end here, I have one last question, and it's for all the aspiring writers out there. What advice do you have for aspiring writers, and are there any common traps you think that you've come across? Any advice you can share with me?
Yes. My advice is, if you want it, keep going until you get it. There's a lot of rejection and doubt and self-doubt involved in publishing because you're taking the inside of your head and you're cracking it open and letting others peek in and see if they like it or not. And that's really, it can be really daunting. And I think it's important to take the steps that you need to take in order to get where you want to go, if that makes sense. And I have friends who are early on in their writing journey and they look at the things that I'm doing, like doing a podcast interview or launching a book and doing all of these different things. And they're like, oh my gosh, I would be terrified to do that. And I'm like, yes, I was terrified of that when I was at your stage too. But first step is finishing the draft. Next step is giving it to people that you respect and who know aren't going to crush your soul with their feedback. And then the next step is giving it to people who might crush your soul, but they'll give you really good feedback. And then taking it on to agents, publishers, little by little stepping out of your comfort zone until you get where you want to be. I feel like it's really easy to get discouraged. I'm coming off a rejection myself. And it kind of hurts because you feel like all of this work is wasted, but it never is, right? Any time you spend revising or putting into a book is time that you have spent learning and growing and becoming better at your craft. And that is never, ever wasted. And then my last piece of advice is one that I heard from Jennifer Nielsen, and she wrote the False Prince trilogy. And it's she's a fantastic person. If you ever have a chance to meet her, do it. She said, figure out what success means to you, and then don't do anything that doesn't get you there. So if success to you is traditional publishing, then a full-length novel, then don't spend your whole months and months and months and all of your writing time just working on short stories. Or if self-publishing and making bank at it is your goal, then don't self-publish one book and then decide that it's too hard and I can't do it, right? Decide what success means for you and then go after it. And sometimes what you need to do to get there is take a break. And that's okay. Pay attention to how you're feeling and trust yourself and trust the process. So that's kind of my rambling advice that I can think of at the moment.
No, I think it's really good advice.
Yeah. If I can do it, I'm nobody. If I can do it, you can do it too. Just, I don't know, edit it a billion times and you'll have it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We were so happy to hear your stories and hear your advice, and good luck with book 2, Untethered, this summer.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been fun to chat with you, and good luck with your podcast and spreading the awesome libraryness digital. That's great.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for today's podcast episode of YA Booklovers. Thanks for listening, and thank you to Kailyn Flanders for joining me today, along with Colleen and Michelle for sharing their YA Lit recommendations with us. Join us again next month when we talk about everything YA. Maybe even another author will stop by for a chat. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Plus, you can also stop by our website at pvlib.net/teens to discover all the latest teen programs at Prescott Valley Public Library. Talk to you all soon.